So let me go ahead and get started. Again, thank you everyone for joining us. Karen, in a minute, just want to give logistics about chatting and that type of stuff and question Q&A. But I'll go ahead and just give you a little bit more introduction to the session today. So we're going to be talking about iAchieve. It's a new component of iPlatform, and appreciate everyone coming to join the call. Today's focus is on grades 5 through 8, and that's particularly, or 4 through 8, that's particularly because that's where most of the assessment data that we're going to be viewing, it's about those grades. And we feel like we've thought that this would be a great group to start with. And this is focused on those of you who are working in your schools. And we'll look forward to sharing it. This is a great new tool. The department has been working quite diligently on developing a new platform for a component of iAchieve, and look forward to sharing it with you all. I'm Mike Schwartz. I'm on the call. I'm here with Karen Matzo and Dina Raybuck. Karen, you just want to introduce yourself, and Dina, feel free as well.
I am Karen Matzo, and I would encourage you throughout to write your questions into the Q&A, and I will monitor your questions and put them out to Mike as we go along. So, and you can feel free to write into the chat too for any dialogue. Anything else that I skipped?
No, that's perfect. This will be recorded, and we'll be posting it as well, so folks can share it with your colleagues as well. Dina, do you want to mention a couple of words about yourself, or I'm happy to do it for you?
Sure. I'm Dina Raybuck, and I'm a developer working on the iAchieve dashboard, and I'm here to support your questions.
And Dina's being modest. Dina's the mastermind behind iAchieve. So when you see all these wonderful things that it can do, just realize it's a lot of hard work from Dina. So Dina, thank you for getting us to where we are. Okay, let's go ahead and get into this. So I want to talk a little bit about iPlatform, which is iAchieve is a part of. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on the other components of iPlatform. Those are in other webinars, and you can view recordings for those if you want. So we're really going to be focusing primarily on iAchieve. But this whole component, iPlatform, contains several tools, and they are really a culmination of a lot of data and information that comes from all you in your school district. So everybody in school district spends a lot of time getting the department data. The purpose of all this is to put that back in your hands so you can really make the best value of it and hopefully inform instruction within your schools. We just want to give you kind of a perspective of where all this data is, kind of what it's all inclusive of. And so this slide gives you some links. You can hyperlink, and Karen, actually, you can probably put the URL in the chat so people can get to the presentation themselves anytime. We'll also be sending it out afterwards. Thank you. But you can, the data comes primarily through our student level data collections that the department's been collecting for years. Currently, that's through iFirst system. As many of you know, that's going to be moving to the index, the new Alma index system going forward in a couple of years. That collects data about student enrollment, when their students are in school, what grade they're in, what statuses are they in terms of race and gender, et cetera. And we combine that with a whole lot of information that we get through student assessment data. And so student assessment data comes from the NHSAS, which includes the Cambium for grades 3 through 8, includes SAT, includes access test, DLM, all the different assessments that make up the New Hampshire State Assessment System. And all that data is pulled together for the purposes of accountability. And so within the accountability system, which is a requirement for every state in the country, that you have an accountability system that says, how are you going to kind of analyze schools to determine what schools are struggling, what schools are doing well. And so you have to come up with a series of indicators. So that accountability system defines those indicators. And those are things like the percent of students who are proficient on a state assessment test, or the growth of how students are growing from one grade to the next. That data is defined through that accountability system. So we use all this data, or the department has been collecting all this data for a variety of reasons. We do it for the state accountability requirement of coming up with how schools are performing. We also do it for adequacy aid, so to determine how much schools should receive for funding. There's a variety of different reasons we collect the data. But the commissioner at the department has been very focused on this concept of, let's not just use this data for accountability, let's not just use this data for determining funding, but let's get this data back into the hands of schools. And so that really kind of led through the efforts that Dina, who's on the call, and then the folks she works with, Jim Kask and Caitlin Davis, to really find funding and develop these initiatives. And so there are three main components for you when you're looking at data within iPlatform. There's more than three, but there's three that I'm going to briefly discuss here. One is iReport, and that's basically a report card. Gives you kind of a simple report card, not simple, but an in-depth report card of every school, every district in the state. Hopefully many of you are familiar with it. Again, we won't go into too much detail, but it has information from achievement data to financial data to suspension or school environment data to teacher data. There's iExplore that lets you look at that data, that information across all schools in the state. So rather than looking at a report card about one school, you're looking at an indicator, for example, class size, and able to look at that across all schools in the state. Finally, what has just been released, and what we're going to spend most of the time today, is iAchieve. And so iAchieve is a component that lets you dive deeper into the state assessment test. So you'll have some of that assessment information in iReport, but iAchieve really gets you to go a little bit further and look at how your students are moving from year to year and through the system. So we hope that the combination of all these tools will continue to allow you to look for areas where you can improve your instruction within your schools. So I'm going to dive right into iAchieve. When we go into it, I will briefly go to the other components of iPlatform, just to, again, make sure all of you are on the same page for those of you who are not familiar with it, but we will be spending most of the time on iAchieve. To get into iAchieve, and what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go through just a handful of slides, just so you realize what you've got access, what slides are included, but then we're going to jump over to a live demo. So in terms of what we're going to walk through, to access iPlatform and iAchieve, which is part of iPlatform, the easiest thing to do, and we'll do it in a minute, is just to Google NH-DOE iPlatform. You can even actually just Google NH iPlatform or iPlatform NH. Here's a link to it, but it's going to bring you to a page on the department's website that has these components of iPlatform that I just described. We'll do that in just a second, but just to kind of walk you through what we're going to see, we'll go into iAchieve itself, and that's basically this dashboard that lets you get into assessment data. In all the tools, iReport, iExplore, iPlatform, they all have a very similar kind of navigation method. They all have tabs at the top, and so you can see here are 4 tabs, and you'll see those when we go live into iAchieve. There are really 4, as you saw, 4 main tabs or 4 components of iAchieve. One that talks about participation information to get a better handle on who's taking the test in your school district. One that looks at proficiency and growth. So how are our students, what percentage of our students are proficient? What levels are they at through that proficiency? What is their growth? Are students growing over time? And it breaks it down by different subgroups and different grades. There's an achievement area, so you can take a look at the achievement results. So that actually breaks down that information about what level, who's proficient in your school, to the actual achievement levels, who's level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, and I'll describe that more when we get to it. And then also the growth, and it shows you the growth over time. And then it's going to do some pretty cool things. We're going to actually be able to look back in time and see how students have moved from one year to the next. And then finally, there's an area about the ESSA indicators. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of what drove these specific indicators that we're looking at was this accountability system that was a requirement from the state. So we'll walk through all those components. What I have here in the slideshow, and part of what the intent of this presentation was to make it something that you could then bring back to your folks, your colleagues in your school. So what I did here is I put down for each one of these 4 sections that we talked about, and then kind of for an overall navigation section, some of the things that I'm actually going to walk you through in just a minute. But I want to point you to this so that you can print out this presentation and take it on your own and share it with walk your colleagues through maybe at a staff meeting or at a right scenario within your school district's operations. So we'll talk about some overall navigation stuff. We'll look at each one of those 4 areas: assessment, participation, proficiency and growth, achievement levels, and the ESSA indicators. So again, I just encourage you to refer back to this in terms of sharing it with your friends, your colleagues in your schools. Okay, there's some more slides. We'll get back to them later. But what we're going to do now is actually go do a live demo. So I'm going to come out of the slide presentation mode and I'll move my little toolbar here. And we're going to go right into iAchieve or into iPlatform. As I mentioned, the easiest way for you to find it is just to do iPlatform NH. And right at the top, I suspect it'll be at the top for you too, is the link to iPlatform. iPlatform has been expanding exponentially over the past year or so. And so you see a lot of new things here. Some of these say new because they're a new update. They may not be completely new, like iReport and iExplore have been around for a while, but we've got a new version of them. But iAchieve is a brand new thing. iGlossary, we're going to take a look at that. Those are kind of the two real brand new components that you probably would not have seen here previously. I'm going to pause for a quick second. Just Karen, are there any questions so far? Or are we good to go?
There are no questions so far.
Okay, then I will keep going.
Okay.
So I'm just going to point out iReport, just to spend 2 minutes, is the component of iPlatform that lets you look at a report card for a given school. So I can type in a school's name or just look at Aiken Middle School, for example. We click View Report, and this is the report card that gives you some detailed information in a variety of different areas, everything from achievement, which we will see some of this when we look at the iAchieve platform, to information about the educators in the school. So what percentage of your classes are taught by certified educators, environment information, which includes things like suspension. So I just want to make sure you're all aware of this. And the other thing I didn't point out earlier is that couple of thoughts about these tools that make up iPlatform. One is that all this data that you're seeing is aggregated data. So it's not individual student information, it's total number of students. So it's the number of teachers or the number of students who are proficient, the number of teachers who are teaching classes outside of their certification area. The reason, obviously, is because we're not, we can't publicly want to give information at the student level. So all of this is information that's aggregated that can be shared with the public. If there are small n sizes, so if you have too few students, we won't display the numbers. We do that again to protect the privacy of individual students. It also means that as a result, it's a public system. We don't have a login. You can just go to it. So we encourage you to share this with colleagues. We encourage you to just go in here and play around. So if you haven't been in iReport, we encourage you just to play around with it. You can't break it. These are simply reports that you're running. If you find problems, let us know. I mean, certainly we want to, and Dina is wonderful about trying to react to the feedback that she's getting. iExplore. So iReport, again, was this report card. You pick a school, you pick a district, you look at the information. iExplore allows you to explore information across the entire state. So for example, here we can look at average class size is what we're looking at right now. And you can look at how does average class size compare throughout the state. If you scroll down to the bottom of this, you can actually sort it if you want. So it's sorted so you can see who are some of the largest and smallest class sizes within the state. Then you can look to the right and you can see if there's a correlation between class size, which is up on the y-axis, and proficiency, which is on the x-axis. And you can look to see, are there certain schools, or are schools that maybe have smaller class sizes, so lower here, doing better in proficiency. And in fact, what we find here is, for those of you who are familiar with, it's called an Pearson R value. This is a very low value, which means there's no correlation shown in this data. So it doesn't seem to matter whether you have a school that has small class size, like some of these down here. Each one of these dots represents a school. You can still have very high achievement. You can have large class size, and you can also have very high achievement. It's a way to kind of understand and look at correlations for data across the state. So again, iExplore lets you take one indicator, look at it throughout the entire state, compare it to other indicators. Okay. That is all I'm going to do right now for iExplore and iReport, and we're really going to dive right into iAchieve, which is really, as I mentioned, the meat of this presentation. Okay, so iAchieve has, similar to iExplore and iReport, for those who are familiar with it, there's some common themes, as I mentioned. There's these tabs across here that lets you get to the different sections of iAchieve. There's color coordination, or color, there's meaning in the color. So red always means ELA, blue always means math, green always means science. There are things that you will see if you click on something to expand it, you've got to click on it to contract it. So a lot of common themes that you might have seen in iReport, iPlatform are also here. There's a wonderful, great, rich text throughout this. So I encourage you not just to look at a graph, but to read the information around it. If you're seeing here FAY count ELA, read what it says, number of FAY students required to test. FAY rate, number of FAY students divided by the number of students required to test. So the text is really very well written. Dina worked hard to try to make sure we've got good descriptions so you understand the data you're looking at. There is lots of hovering. So again, for those who are familiar with iReport and iExplore, when you hover over different graphs throughout the system, you'll get pop-ups that give you some great information, much more in detail. So certainly be looking throughout the system as you explore it to look for different areas and hover to see what information is provided behind or below the graphic that you're looking at. There's the ability to, when you click on things, some things expand. So for example, if I click on search for a school or district in the state, it expands and I can type in Portsmouth, for example, if I want to look at Portsmouth School District, and we'll do that for the purposes of this demo getting started at least. And you choose Portsmouth. So when you click on something to make it expand, similar to iReport and iExplore, you have to click on it a second time to make it contract. So just make sure if something's popped up, if you want to make it disappear in that sense, you would click on it again to make it shrink. A couple of other points. I mentioned FAY count, and I said number of FAY students. Well, that might be great if you know what FAY was, but if you don't know what FAY means, then you might be a little bit confused about exactly what that is representing. So another thing that's been included here is this data definitions. So it's what's called the iGlossary. And if you click on this, it actually brings you into this iGlossary, and you can scroll down and look for FAY. So I scroll past F, so I'm not going to find it, but here we got FAY. If I click on that, and I can get a description of FAY, meaning students who have 90% or higher average daily membership during an academic year. That in itself may not be enough. So if you're looking at the term and you're not sure exactly still what it means, send us an email, reach out to the help desk, and we'd appreciate the feedback because we could certainly expand it to make it more meaningful for you. And I think we'll actually do that so that it's a little bit more meaningful in the sense that helps you understand that FAY means when it says 90% or higher average daily membership, what that means is it's FAY represents students who are in your school at least 90% of your school year. So if you have a student that arrived in, say, December, that student might still take your state assessment test, but they're not included as an FAY student. The reason for that is when we deal with accountability of schools, we only want to deal with students that we felt you really have the ability to impact their education throughout that year. And so for that, we only choose students or we only include students who are in your schools 90% of the year. But anyway, let's go back to iAchieve. So the main concept though here is if you're looking for more information, click on data definitions, and that will help describe different terms throughout the system. I am going to hold off on talking about filters. We will do that in a minute, but you might have seen this thing that says show filters, and that's something else that you'll want to know. Oh, another couple of things that I wanted to point out, if I look back in my notes, you will see sometimes rather than seeing a number, you might see a range. We do that to protect, again, the privacy of students. And so it's kind of a common theme that you'll see when we're displaying numbers frequently. When we're displaying counts of students, you'll see those ranges. The other thing is if I hover over this, you'll see where it might say NA or star N. That's going to represent when we don't have enough students to display. So it might be that there are no students in that group, like maybe there are no American Indian or Alaskan students within the school, or it means that there's such a small number, we're not going to display it, because if we told you what the achievement was for that group and there was only 1 or 2 students in that group, you would know how those students performed. And so we have to suppress that data. Okay, that's some general navigation. Let's dive into this first tab, assessment participation. Excuse me. So in each one of these tabs, you'll see a variety of different information throughout the screen. They relate to that topic. So these all relate to participation. Let's take a look at each one of these 4 different components. In the top left is participation rate. And so what this is saying, and again, read the text, it's very helpful, the number of students who tested divided by the number of students registered to test. So what this is saying, required to test. So what this is saying, of all the students in Portsmouth, we're looking at Portsmouth School District, of all the students who are required to test, 94% of those students took the English test, 94% took the math test, and 88% of the students who were required to test took the science test. We determine required to test based on business rules that are defined in the state accountability system. Typically what it means is that the student was enrolled in the school during the testing window. So as long as the student, like in grade 4, was there during the testing window for grade 4 students, they're required to test. For SAT, they need to be there during the SAT test. So 94% of the students who were enrolled during the assessment period took the ELA test. If you look down, when you hover over this, you can look at those rates then by different subgroups. So for example, here we see that homeless students, only 75% of the homeless students took the test. So that might be an area that the school wants to focus on in terms of helping make sure that all the students who are homeless also are able to get into the school and take the test. You'll also notice when this pop up that you see the information over time. So you'll see the participation rates over time for the past 3 years. In 2020, 2020, students didn't take the test because of the fact that we had COVID. So you'll see that reflected throughout all these different charts. To the right is FAY count. So this gives you the count of students who spent the full academic year in your school. So in this case, there's somewhere around 1,200 students in Portsmouth in the grades tested who were enrolled throughout the entire year. This has some value, and you definitely, when you're looking, we'll talk later, but you can filter it down to a grade level, and you can get an idea of whether most of your students are taking the test and what that number looks like. But more importantly is this FAY rate. And so what this is showing us is the percentage of students who were required to test, meaning they were there during your enrollment period, your testing window, and what percentage of those were full academic year students. This is a really good indicator. So what this is saying is 96.2% of the students who are required to test spent the full year in Portsmouth. And so it's a great way for you to identify. Schools frequently think that their students are very transient. Maybe they're coming and going quite frequently throughout the year. In fact, what this is showing us is that that's not really the case, at least in this school district, that 96% of the students who were there during the testing window were there for 90% of the year. And I think if we go look at the state, we'd see a very similar count for that. And I can actually just do that real quick. So if I can go back to my search, I type the search for the state. I choose the state of New Hampshire, and we can see quickly. Oh, I'm sorry. I realized that I should have realized this was not the case. The state number expects everybody. It doesn't calculate full academic year students. It doesn't display full academic year students. So I just walked myself into something I shouldn't have done. We're looking at maybe updating this, but you can't. If you want to know what the full academic year rate was for the state, email me and we'll find out for you. So let's go back to Portsmouth. And let's talk about these other areas. So there's another couple areas, and again, these pop-ups will break down those rates by groups. You can look to see if there's certain groups, once again, that are more transient than others. The last thing to point out here, or two more things, is the percentage of students not tested. So a couple of thoughts. One is this is going to be the inverse of the one above. So 94% took the test, 6% didn't. And so, clearly you could calculate it by subtracting it from 100, but we thought this would be a nice, easy way to see it. But then if you hover over it, it tells you for each one of the subgroups what percentage of the students didn't take the test. So for example, for females, we see in 2022, 7% of the students didn't take the test, or the female students. If I scroll up here and we look at ELA, we can see 93% of the female students took the test. So again, those should complement each other. If you want to understand of the kids who didn't take the test, what percentage of them were in groups, what groups were those students in? That's what this breakdown will do. So this breakdown now says, of all the students who didn't take the test, how many of them were female and how many of them were female? So in this case, actually, we see that females were missing the test more than males were for the ones who should have taken the test. This adds up to 100% because obviously there's, those represent the full set of students. Race, so this says that 75% of the students who didn't participate in the test, of the students who didn't participate in the test, 75% of them were white. This says that of the students who didn't participate in the test, 45% of them were students with disability. So that's kind of how you read this. Again, as I mentioned before, sometimes when you get pop-ups, like this is not a hovering one, I have to click on something to make it happen. You have to click on it a second time to make it shrink. The last thing I just want to point out, just kind of get this connection between iAchieve and iPlatform. If I go back to or iReport, if I go back to iReport, I want you to realize that some of this information is the same stuff that you might have seen in iReport. What iAchieve is going to do is going to get you to another level and a deeper level of detail. But if I go to Portsmouth School District for iReport and I view the report, we should see, if I go to achievement, that, oops, let me just move this over here, that the achievement of 90, or the participation rate of 94% should match, right? Don't set myself up for another mistake here, but should match what we see here. So if we look at the achievement rate for Portsmouth, and we go down to participation, we see it says 94%. So that is matching 88% for science. So I want you to realize there is some connection between iReport and iAchieve, but iAchieve is going to break it down to a lower level of detail for you. Okay, that's the assessment participation tab. Let me just stop for a quick second, see, Karen, if there's any questions, or Dina, if I missed anything, you want to add it, please do.
Please go ahead, Mike. You're doing great.
Okay.
Mike,
Yeah.
there is a question.
Yes.
Michael Hensley has a question. If parents can opt their child out of testing, why are schools held responsible for those scores? Oh, well, that's not an iAchieve necessarily, but
I can answer. So the question is, the issue is that some parents do opt, the state has given the ability for a parent to opt their child out of taking the test. Unfortunately, the federal government requires that we hold schools accountable, even for, if a large percentage of those students don't take the test. So from a accountability perspective, the federal government says it's okay if 5% of your students don't take the test. Anything above that, we have to count as a zero when we're looking at the accountability of what percentage of students were proficient on the state assessment. So there is a grace of the 5%. Beyond that, it's a requirement from the federal government. I should say, though, and Dina, correct me if I'm wrong, when we look, like we'll go to proficiency right now, these counts that we're seeing here, these are the true proficiencies for the students who took the test. It doesn't hold you accountable for the students who didn't take the test. So where we're saying, I'm going to pause just to make sure Dina doesn't.
No, that's true. I think the question is asking about the 95% denominator, and we only use the 95% denominator when we calculate the ESSA or the accountability factors.
Yeah.
Proficiency and growth values do not include that 95% denominator.
Yeah. So if this says 76% of the students took or were proficient on the assessment test, it wouldn't matter how many students opted out. It's just looking at the students who took the test. Okay, so let's talk more about proficiency and growth. So again, some of this information is information you might have seen in iReport, but it definitely gives you more detail than is there. If I hover over proficiency, and what we're seeing here is 76% of the students were proficient in ELA. If I hover it over, it then breaks it down. It shows you longitudinally over years. It also breaks it down in different subgroups. The other thing you'll notice on this is there are a couple of indicators, and I can't move my mouse to point it, so you're going to have to just look at the box that says that's popped up there. And if you look at those red bars, there's many red bars there. You'll see a little line that goes up and down. You'll see a little diamond. The line and the diamond are targets that again, as part of the state accountability plan that the federal government requires each state to create. So that New Hampshire created targets, and they have these intern targets, and those targets are increasing each year. The target this year for ELA is that 62.5% that you see up top. And then the diamond shows you the end goal target. So there's a target of a long-term target of where we want to get schools, where we hope schools are going to get to their students to by the end of that time period, being I think it's several years. So that's the proficiency information. Let me just quickly take a look. Okay. The next is growth. So growth here shows you the growth for the median average growth percentile for all your students in ELA and math in your school. If you hover it over it again, you can see if that growth percentile is similar for different subgroups or whether some certain subgroups are having a more difficult time than others. I won't go into how growth percentile is calculated, but this is a very good indicator to help you understand, regardless of whether you're a high-performing school or a school that has a lot of students who are struggling. It kind of equalizes that, and it lets you look at how is your growth compared to similar students throughout the entire state. And so 50% is average. If you get above 50%, you're doing better than other schools who have similar types of students. Okay, a new addition to this, the iPlatform that you haven't seen before is this heat map, or this map that's showing us by grade how students have done over time. I know that we've used this type of instrument many times with lots of schools. It's something now that you can get access to immediately. Before, you had to kind of build this information yourself. So this is a great addition. What it lets you do is basically take a look at a cohort over time. And so what we're not, that's one thing it lets you do. It's not a true cohort in the sense that students, it may be, some students may come or go throughout the year, but for the most part, for most of your schools, you'll see, a large percentage of your students are the same students year after year. And so if you follow this diagonally down any one of these diagonals, you're looking at a similar set of students. So this is in grade 3 in 2018, 85% of the students were proficient. In 2019, 82% were proficient. We had COVID year. Then 63% were proficient, and then back up to 78% of the students were proficient. So it's a way to look at a given cohort over time and see how they're doing. It's the way to look at a given year and see how all your students are doing across all grades in a given year. Or it's a way to look at a given grade and look at a grade over multiple years and see how that grade typically does, from year to year. That, each year, how does that grade 3 class, how does the grade 3 doing every year? This is ELA, it's got math, and it's got science. So a great tool to help you understand and look at data over time and kind of analyze. And we're going to come back to this a little bit later. There's also the same ability with your mean growth percentile, and that as well lets you look at it over time. Of course, not of course, but just to make sure it's clear, for grade 3, we don't have a growth percentile because a growth percentile requires 2 years of assessments, because we're looking at how did you grow from last year to this year. So that's why in grade 3, you'll see NA or COVID, because we don't have that information. Dina, we probably technically should make that NA for those two. Okay, let me see. What else do I want to point out in this? Okay, let me do a filter. So one thing we haven't done yet is filter. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to, right now, if I hover over the ELA participation, we can see that there were 80% of the females in ELA were proficient. So if you can read that in the pop-up there under 2022, the second bar, it says 80% females were proficient. Overall, it's 76%. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a filter here, though. I'm going to add a filter, and we're going to say we just want to filter by sex, and we're going to filter sex for females. And so what this is now going to do is it's going to update all these charts, just thinking about the females within the population of Portsmouth. And so now we see that 80% that we saw when we did the breakdown. But what it also lets us do, for example, is look at all the grades and see how the females are doing from year to year. So again, you can filter this for any different group. So, maybe you want to filter this for a given grade. Maybe you want to filter this for another subgroup like race, or a subgroup, for example. I'm looking at specifically the students who are economically disadvantaged. That might be another way you want to look at the data, because maybe that's a group that you want to focus on. English language learners could be another way you do this. So a nice tool. A couple of things to point out is that when you select the filter, if you want to hide it, you've got to click here again to hide it. The other thing actually is to point out that under each one of these titles, you will see, if you've got a filter, you'll see what students you're filtering for. So in this case, we're still filtering for economically disadvantaged students. So you want to make sure that you don't kind of forget that you were filtering. As an example, for example, let's go back here, and I'm going to filter for grade 3. And I'll say all students. So now we're filtering for all students in grade 3. And we'll see the percentage of students proficient for those grades 3, that in grade 3. If, however, and then I'm going to hide this. So now you can see we're saying we're grade 3. If, however, I then switch over to Portsmouth Middle School, now we're going to see there's no data. And there's no data because I'm filtering for grade 3 and I'm looking at a middle school. So I just warn you, because I actually made the mistake myself, to take a look and make sure you're looking at the filters, and make sure when you're done with those filters that you click here and return yourself to showing that you've got all filters selected and all students selected. And now again, we see them even though we're looking at Portsmouth Middle School. Okay, I think that's what I've got to show you for this proficiency and growth area. So let's move on to achievement levels.
No questions yet.
Okay. So achievement level lets you, again, break down the proficiency, what percentage of your students are proficient, to learn more about the levels they're at. So are they at level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4? There is some neat information here that we didn't see before, though. For example, if you hover over level 3, we can actually see where are those students who are level 3 this year, where did they come from? How many of them were level 2 last year? How many of them were level 4 last year? And you can get a sense of how students are moving from year to year. We'll come back to this in a little while, but this is a great way for you to get a sense of how your students are. You might see an improvement in your the percentage of students who are level 3, but you still that might mean people are dropping from 4 or moving from 2, and you want to get a sense of where they're coming and going from. Academic growth. Again, you can see the academic growth, and what this is showing us is the mean growth percentile by level. And so what it's saying is, for those of your students who are in level 1 this year, their average growth percentile was 30.18. For those who are in level 4 this year, the average growth percentile was 75.82. This is somewhat helpful. Dina actually talked about this earlier. We may revise this a little bit, but you will find, because students who are level 1 this year, the only way to go to get to level 1 is either stay from level 1 or move from a higher level and drop down to level 1. And so, for example, here we can see there's the numbers are too small, so I can't see it. But you'll have a lower average growth percentile because this group represents students who either moved from 2 down to 1 or were already in 1. And same thing with level 4. The only way you can get to level 4 is you were in level 4 or you moved up to level 4. And so you're going to have a very high growth percentile for all these. So that's going to be fairly common for most schools, but it still gives you some indication of whether your students are doing growing well or not within those different growth, their achievement levels. Finally, you can look at the data over time. You can look at the achievement data over time. You can look at the growth data over time. As we'll see, if I look, for example, this is 2020, this is the current year, so 2022. These are students who are level 4. And so level 4, we can see in math, 35% of the students were level 4 this year. That matches the 35% we see up here. But now you can look at it across time. When we don't have the COVID year, so another couple of years, it'll be nice because you'll be able to see a better trend across, the full set of 5 years. Okay, let me see if there's anything else I want to point out here. I think that covers it. So let me continue on to ESSA indicators. So the ESSA indicators are, again, the accountability requirements require us to have a variety of different indicators. These indicators are what we use to determine whether schools doing well or struggling. There are 4 indicators for elementary schools and for K-8 schools, and there are 4 indicators for high schools. The indicators that we're looking at here include achievement, growth, equity. There's English language proficiency, so the percentage of students who are proficient in their English language. College and career readiness, so the percentage of students who are ready for college or career, and that's based on 10 different indicators or 12 different indicators, of which a student hopefully achieves 2 of those. We're seeing NA here because we're looking at middle school, and this would only be applicable for high school. And then graduation rate. There are two main sections here. One is the overall indicator rating. And so a school can have a rating that's anywhere from 1 to 4. 1 is the lowest indicator, kind of matches our achievement levels that we use for the state assessment test. 4 means you're doing really well in terms of that indicator. And so you can see here for the Smith Elementary School, there are 3 all across the board for their 3 main indicators. And that's, you know, a positive, a strong display for their indicators. Below is the actual indicator value. So there's 1 for achievement, there's 1 for growth, there's 1 for equity, and so on. What this is showing us is their value. So their average achievement was 2.86. Their average growth was 55.49. That's a growth percentile. And their growth percentile for their equity, and equity takes a look at your students who are struggling the most, and it kind of gives a heavier weight on those. So it's looking at the average growth considering the students who are struggling as kind of the primary focus. This will show you the different gradients of color of green, show you where they fall. So you can see this at level 3, so they're in the 3rd section or the 3rd level. And if you hover over it, you can actually see what that achievement indicator value was over time. And you can also see it broken out for different subgroups. And we'll come back to this in a few minutes as well. This indicator achievement value, back to I think it was Michael's question earlier, this does include the students who, if you had more than 5% of students missing, not taking the test, who are full academic year, this would show the impact of those students. This is the one place that would show it. I should also mention, just to fully explain that question that was asked earlier, the 95% rule. So if more than 5% of your students don't take the test, remember too that only counts for the full academic year students. So if a student wasn't there for the entire year and they didn't take the test, you don't get held accountable for those students. Okay. So I think that covers, for the most part, the 4 sections within iAchieve. Karen or Dina, feel free to add anything. Dina or Karen, let me know if there's questions. But what I'm going to do now is go back to the presentation. And the next thing we want to do, we've got 2 kind of shorter sections here in the end. I know we've got about 10 more minutes or so, is I want to walk you through some scenarios. So I want you to kind of get in the mindset of thinking, okay, we've seen a lot of this data. I understand what iAchieve provides. How will I use it? You know, what questions might I answer? And so I've got 3 scenarios here that we're going to walk through and look at the data and see where we'd find that in iAchieve. So the first one is that I'm a curriculum coordinator in Bow, and I'm interested in our math results. So maybe I'm a curriculum coordinator, we're focusing on math, or we're going to start a new initiative math. Maybe we're doing budgeting season and we want to think about changing our math work. And I've got some questions about my math achievement. One is I want to see how we are growing in math after the pandemic. The second question I might want to ask is I want to see if there are any trends in our grade level math results in the past few years. So I want to see in math, how did we do after the pandemic? And I want to see if there's any trends. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to iAchieve. I'm going to switch over to Bow. So I'm going to click on the search. I'm going to type in Bow. I'm going to hit the enter key, and that will bring up the list. I'm going to choose the districts. And I'm going to click the X to shrink that. And I'm going to go to proficiency and growth. And what I wanted to know was, for math, how did we do after the COVID years? And so I can look here and I can see in this chart, after COVID, you know, these are the percentiles of where we are for the percentage of students who are proficient. And I also might want to look at some trends looking at this math information. So I'm actually going to switch over, and for any of those that are looking at the presentation, you'll see that I actually have a solution set here. And so what we're seeing here, and this should be the same information if I did this correctly than what I just showed you here. And it's not, because I think before I actually was looking at, I should have chosen Bow Memorial School, I believe. Nope, let me try this again. Okay, let me try this again. So this should have been Bo.
Mike, it looks like you have the district numbers up to the right of the chart you're looking at in your PowerPoint. Like you're doing a district versus.
Oh, you're right.
The school.
Right.
Yeah.
You're right. Thank you. So let's take a look at these numbers, assuming these are all for the district. And basically what this would be saying is for math, for 2022, these were the numbers of how we were doing. You know what I was doing? I did growth. I think my question, okay, I apologize. Let me take a look back at what I was. Yeah. My question, I forgot what my question was. That's why that was the mistake I made. So the question was, I want to see how we're growing. So not what is our percent proficient, but actually how we're growing. And so if I look at these results here, and this is how we're growing, because this was the growth percentile. We can see that we are 64% in grade 4 in our growth, 37, 59, 50, et cetera. And that should match our numbers here, and it does. Apologize for that. Thank you, Dina. So looking at the growth, if I'm the Bo curriculum director, I could see that, it looks like we're doing fairly well, although grade 5 seems to have some lower growth in our years after COVID. So that would be one thing I learned. If I look at, average is 50, we're doing better in 3 of the grades. We're certainly doing very well in grade 4. If I want to look at trends over time, I might see a few things. So one thing I see is if I look at the diagonal, so grade 4 in 2018, grade 5 in 2019, grade 7 in 2021, and grade 8 in 2022, I can see that there's a trend where our growth percentile kept getting lower. So this might be what this is telling me is it's telling me that we've got a cohort of students who are currently in grade 9 and now in 2023 that might need some support. And so we may want to work with our high school and help make sure our high school knows that there might be some need in math for these students who seem to be struggling over time. This is something where hopefully you might capture earlier. But this is one way you might learn or identify a trend that might translate into some instructional changes that you might make within the school. The other thing I noticed looking at this graphic is that grade 5 seems to have lower growth percentiles compared to the other grades for any given year. So 36 is the lowest in this column, 43 is the lowest in this column, 40 is not the lowest, but it's low. 49 is not the lowest, but it's low. But it does, so maybe they're doing better in 21, 22, but certainly this is something that might, want me to ask, what is it might be happening in grade 5 that, might translate into lower growth percentiles. So again, different ways that you might want to think as a curriculum instructor and instruction specialist, what can I learn and what might we want to then discuss within our school based on what we're seeing. Okay. Second question. I'm still in Bo, but I want to see our federal growth indicators similar for all subgroups in our middle school. Is there a group that we should focus on? And let me look at another middle school and see if they have a similar percentage of students eligible for free and reduced lunch. Oh, and let me look at it. Okay, I'm sorry. So the first question is, let me look at my federal growth indicator and let me see for all my subgroups in my middle school, are there certain groups that we might be struggling with when we're looking at that growth indicator? Then once I've done that, I might want to look for another middle school in the state that has a similar demographic to my school, so similar to Bo Middle School. So what I'm going to do is go back over to iAchieve. We're going to go ahead and choose Bo Middle School or Bo Memorial School, which is their middle school. We're going to go take a look at the ESSA indicators because we said we wanted to look at the indicator for growth. And if we hover over this, we can see, I've got to move my little zoom thing here. We can see that there are 50.64, our median growth percentile for all our kids is 50.64. Sorry, I've got to move my other toolbar here. However, if I look at my economically disadvantaged students, it's only 41.48. And if I look at my students with disabilities, it's 39.02. So the average growth percentile for my economically disadvantaged students is quite a bit lower than my students as a whole population. And the same thing with my students with disability. Maybe that's usual, maybe not. I don't really know, but we can look at some other schools to tell. But again, remember that the growth percentile is comparing those students to similar students in terms of their academic performance throughout the state. So you hope that, regardless of where folks started, they'll be able to grow similar to other students. So again, what I'm going to do now is what we wanted to do was we wanted to look at another school that had a similar percentage, similar demographics, so similar number of students who are economically disadvantaged. So we don't want a school that has a much different poverty perspective than our school. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go to not iReport, but we're going to go back to iPlatform NH, and we're going to go to iExplore. Because I just want to pull in iExplore for a quick second for this as a reminder for folks. One of the things I mentioned before in iExplore is you can take a look at an indicator like poverty. So we're going to take economically disadvantaged students. We can sort that group. We can zero that group in, so we're only looking at middle schools. And now we can see, once it brings back that list of middle schools.
We have to hit apply.
Thank you. We can now see, if we go down to Bow, that Bow has less than 10% of students who are economically disadvantaged. So they're a school that has a very small economically disadvantaged population. We also see that Amherst Middle School is another similar one. So what I might want to do now is go back to iAchieve, choose Amherst. And let's look at their middle school. And we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to go down to their growth percentile, 47.8. So they have a little lower growth percentile overall. And we're going to look at their breakout. And we see for them, this should come up in a second. There we go. For them, 47.80% of all students was the median growth percentile. If we look at economically disadvantaged, it's 46.5, and we look at students with disabilities, 45.78. So for the most part, they're very similar in their growth percentile. Not sure what that tells us. It definitely tells us there's a little bit something going on. It might be a little bit different in terms of their population. It might be something that one school, Bo, may want to go reach out to Amherst and talk to them and understand it. Why they think there might be. They might have more consistency in terms of the growth across student demographics, where Bo might have a little bit more of a variation. So that was our second question. I think we got time for one more question. I'm the principal in Amherst Middle School, so we're going to stay with the same school. And I want to know if my students in level 2 math this year moved up from level 1. Was this similar for 7th grade? So maybe I'm in the Amherst Middle School, I'm thinking about my different grades, and I want to understand, of my students who were in level 2, were those students we moved up from level 1, or were we seeing that some of those were students who were moving down from level 2, from 3, or from another level? So we go back to, we're going to go back to iAchieve. We're still in Amherst. We're going to look at the proficiency and growth. I'm sorry, we're going to look at achievement levels, because I said we want to look at students specifically in achievement level 2. We're looking at math, I think I said. And so if we look at here, we see that of the kids, of the 31% of the students who were level 2 in math, we see that 42% of those were level 2 the year before. We see that 17% of those were level 1 the year before. So 17% of the students moved up from level 1 and are now in level 2. And 21% of the students moved from level 3 down to level 2. So again, this is information that, hopefully you might want to learn from and think about, what is it? You might want to then do some research and understand which are the students that moved down a level, which are the students that moved up a level, and have some conversations about what you can do for the folks who moved down. What was it you did maybe that helped the folks who moved up? Once you get those groups of students, maybe you look at attendance information, maybe you look at information on what classes they were in, other things that might kind of answer that. But the other thing that the question I wanted to ask myself was, is that the same for grade 7? Maybe that varied across grades. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and show my filters. I'm going to choose grade 7. And now this is going to update it. And now instead of saying 31% of the students were level 2, we see 33% of the students were in level 2. And in this case, we actually see of those students, 24% of those students moved up from level 1, 18% of those students moved down from level 3. So it appears that in 7th grade, the students were doing a little bit better in terms of moving up versus having some students that fell down. in terms of going up to 2 or down from 3. The other thing you should point out, obviously, is that some students might be very close to the borderline of a level 2 and a level 3, or level 1 and a level 2. And so you certainly would want to look at, of those kids who moved from one level to the other, how far did they move, and what was it again that might have caused that movement. Okay, so those are our scenarios. Hopefully that helps give you an idea of how you might think, questions and things you might want to think about, and how you might use iAchieve to get you the answers for those questions. Of course, as we saw, once we get some answers, that they're not giving you the answers to what you should do. They're giving you more information that hopefully then enlightens you to say, okay, let me look down this path in terms of looking at something specific, looking at specific student results within my school or my district. Okay, last couple of slides, and then we'll wrap it up. One slide that we have in here, and again, I've got the answers that we just talked through, so you can look back at this again, share this with your colleagues. A couple of other slides I'll finish up with here. One is just some navigation items for you to remember. So things we talked about, but things about, hover, look for different graphics, and you'll see some wonderful pop-ups. The idea of looking at your filters, the color, the meaning of color, the data definitions, and use of the iGlossary. So a variety of things that you'll want to remind yourself of. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about what's coming up. Both within iReport and all of iPlatform, we still have some more data from 21, 22 that we have to get loaded into the system. Coming later in April, you'll find the finance and post-secondary and IDEA, which is for your special education students. That information will be loaded in iPlatform. Also, there is a new iPlatform data and reports page. I'll show you that when I go through the last 2 bullets. So there's a new landing page that gets you to kind of historical information about different characteristics about schools, not from iPlatform, more from a enrollment count and school calendars and that type of thing. And then additionally, there's going to be a new landing page for all the iPlatform components. And so that'll be coming to create a kind of more meaningful, easier way to navigate through all these different resources. And then there's lots of other training. There's some more training scheduled. So we've got a couple more scheduled now, and there'll be more coming up as well. So we encourage you to come back or share this information with your colleagues. The last thing, I'm going to jump over to show you the reports page of iPlatform, but I'll come back to this contact information. Please reach out. We want this to be useful. We want this to be easy for you. Don't struggle if you've got questions. If there's data that doesn't look right to you, please reach out to us, and we'd like to help. Let me escape out of here real quick and just show you back in the iPlatform homepage. The training information, by the way, is on a link off of the homepage. So there's a little iPlatform training section. And my internet will behave. I get to finish up right on time at 4:15, but it's not behaving. Here we go. So the training and resources are here at this link. I did want to also point out this data and reports page. So this is a new page off of iPlatform. It has data that had already been on the department's website before, but it's kind of reformatted and created a more central place for you to get some of these historical reports. They're usually either what are called SSSR reports, kind of Excel reports that you can download to Excel. And the other thing I didn't mention is on iAchieve, there is a download page. You can download a lot of the statistics from iAchieve as well. Well, I am not going to wait for this because you can try it out yourselves. These are just when the page comes up, it's a series of links to different pages on the department's website, different reports. For example, if you want to see what the school calendars are for schools across the state, what weeks people are taking vacations, if you want to see enrollment counts, free and reduced participation rates, things like that, those reports going back many years are on that page. So with that, I'm going to stop.